Hello? Hello? Steve?
It's a very plaintive sounding voice.
Yeah, I know. Steve, are you there? Are you there, buddy?
I'm here, man. I'm with
you.
you.
Thank God. Thank God. Thank God you're there, Steve.
Once more under the breach, my friend. Once more under the breach.
Henry V. That's Henry V here on the Chinwag. And it's the Chinwag, by the way. That's Henry V, I believe. I believe that's a famous speech from Henry V.
It's a great play.
It is a great play.
I really just know that one speech, that one scene.
I kind of vaguely know that one scene too, but that's the whole England and St. George and St. Crispin's Day. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers.
Yes.
That's where Band of Brothers is from.
Oh.
Yes. Wow, that just came back to me. I think that's right. We Band of Brothers. Yeah, that's when he gets everybody.
It's a stirring speech.
It is a stirring speech.
We give it to each other right before we start recording the Chinwag.
Every time we're giving you a little glimpse behind the curtain here. This is what we do. So we work ourselves up. We do a little Shakespeare Henry V to each other. Jesus Christ, unbelievable. We few, we happy few. We Band of Brothers.
Whoa, man.
Amazing. It is a great speech, and that's before the Battle of Agincourt.
Yes,
Steve, where the British bowmen bested the French armored soldiers.
Were they like totally outnumbered? Was that like a?
No, I think it was a technological leap. That battle.
Okay.
I think it was this. The age of armor was passing.
I see.
Because it was these guys all sort of all these fucking French counts and everything, and their armor and stuff were riding out, and these guys were just nailing them with these crossbows and longbows.
Okay.
And so it was like, and it created chaos for the these kind of footmen, these ordinary dudes with their longbows were defeating this kind of military machine, all in armor, because they fucked them up that way.
That's actually an interesting, maybe this is too in the weeds, but it could be a cool Chinwag.
That might be well, how so? You mean like
innovations on the battlefield? Like if you think about,
interesting.
The British and the American soldiers fighting and the different techniques of lining up and marching versus, the sort of guerrilla style, that could be kind of a cool, if we got a specialist,
No, when all that stuff moves on,
Yeah.
I think the American Civil War was a big step forward in a lot of that, because they were still fighting that kind of Napoleonic war. But the weapons were getting more advanced, so that you had, in the First World War, I think was another one.
Yep.
Where it was sort of like this old war was being fought, and then these advances on it. And now it's just dudes sitting in a room flying a drone around.
And they're working on the robots too that'll be just coming over the hill.
Right. Is that really, that's where it's heading? Huh?
They are working on it.
So we'll all be fought out by robots. Well, maybe that's better. I don't know. Is it better? I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, some people say like that could be, it's better for whoever has the fucking robots, that's for sure. But also like they might be better at like avoiding friendly fire and killing innocents and stuff, because some people say they'd be better at reading the data.
Interesting.
I don't know if that's true or not.
Interesting. Weird.
Yeah.
God damn it.
I know.
A weird world. The world is just getting weirder, Steve. And thank God we have the Chinwag as a refuge from reality. Right? It's a refuge from reality. And we're really digging into the life of the mind, the peaceful life of the mind, because this is the second part of our Ask the Philosopher foray. Our journey through Western philosophy.
This is super fun.
Yeah? You're having a good time?
Yeah, you totally indulged me on this, and I appreciate it, and hopefully people will enjoy it too. It's a cool story, even though it's occasionally a little dense, but I think we have a good time with it.
Totally. No, you definitely, and you present it, you serve it up in style, in a way that's very palatable and very digestible and entertaining. Absolutely.
It's not total gobshite. Not total gobshite.
No, it is not. It is not. Not a word of gobshite has ever come out of your mouth. Me, on the other hand. But thankfully, you have been patient and kind, and it's going to continue. And we want to, of course, thank you all for listening in and joining us, for your support, your enthusiasm, and for helping us create a remarkable community.
Yeah,
here.
and we love the community, and we want you all to just grow it a little bit by sending an episode that you like to a friend. Just text it to them. It's super easy to do once you're listening to it, so go ahead and do that if you would.
This is the Chinwag Challenge. This is the Chinwag Challenge. We throw our gauntlet down to you.
That's right.
And say, we challenge you.
Big rewards, huge money involved in this.
Absolutely.
I don't know how you're going to get it, but there's going to be some windfall for everyone who does this.
You will get some sort of, yes, there's something in it for you, dear listeners. There's more of us is what it is.
Yes.
There's more of the gold of our conversation, the bullion that we serve up.
The bullion
of our conversation, the bullion.
The white hot blank of the Chinwag.
But send it on to somebody who else you think might dig this. People who don't know about it. Can you believe nobody knows about it? There are people in the world who don't know about this, that there's anybody that doesn't know about this? That's insane to me.
Yeah.
That's wrong.
Like Island,
We're
where
the
most sort of untouched civilization, they listen to the Chinwag.
The Sentinel Islanders are big Chinwag fans?
They're huge Chinwag
That's good to know.
fans.
Okay, that's great. I'm glad we're changing. We're giving them a little taste of modernity. But do please take a moment and keep the questions coming as well. And comments and letters. Your letters.
We love the letters, and the comments are
out
great.
of sight. Out of sight. We're going to continue to dip into the deep, dark Chinwag mailbag. So without further ado, we're going to keep moving on into the world of the mind. The history of Western philosophy as laid out by Professor Stephen Asma. Here we go, part 2. And we're going to start with we're going to enter hot with the rationalists and the empiricists. So here we go. Is it Hume and Locke that come kind of next? These rationalists?
Great, yeah.
Okay,
Excellent.
listen, I boned up. Professor. I was not
Paul,
going to fuck this up. I wasn't going to look like an idiot doing this one. So, and these are these rationalists who are coming in England, right?
Okay, yeah. So these guys are usually contrasted with the rationalists. They're more about the senses. They're like, forget about logic. It can only take you so far. It's good for math, but you really want to understand nature. Let's start doing some experiments. Let's start so Galileo is very important. He's like rolling balls down an inclined plane and measuring instead of Aristotle's you drop two things. If one's heavier, it'll fall faster than a lighter thing. That's not how it happens. They fall at the exact same rate.
Right.
So science starts to come along. So John Locke in England and David Hume, who's a Scottish philosopher, huge influence on the founding fathers, like Benjamin Franklin knew these guys, Adam Smith.
Big influence on the formation of this country.
Yes, huge influence on Jefferson and certainly Franklin. I don't know about Adams, actually. It'd be interesting. I suspect Adams knew a lot of their work, too.
Yeah, I'm sure he did, but it's all coming from a classical tradition anyway.
Yeah.
And I know that he looked back to the Romans a lot and stuff like that, Cicero and people like this.
Yeah.
But I don't know about, I'm sure he did. I'm sure he did with Locke and Hume and stuff like that.
And they thought that what you do is you study nature and then you can develop a better science, and that can get rid of superstition. So this is the rise of the Enlightenment. You want to get rid of the superstition of religion, study nature, and humans are part of that.
Right. And Hume was an atheist, right? I mean, it's like...
Oh, tricky.
I just stepped in it big time. Wow.
Yeah, the fans are really going to be
There we go. Now people are, wow, we're
this.
going to hear from David Hume fans all from Scotland. They get a lot of, okay.
I would say, generally speaking, yes, he is an atheist, but he was so careful that he never entirely showed his hand on this and so he wrote a book. His whole life he was working on this book called The Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion. And it's a little book, like you can read it in 2 nights. And people still are trying to figure out which guy was Hume. Was he the atheist character, or is he this character, or is he that character?
Oh, it's the 2 guys that having a dialogue in this book, and
3 guys, yeah.
Oh, interesting.
But yeah, I would say this is the time when atheism is starting to get popular, and people think that they suspected him of atheism, so he couldn't actually get a good university job. He couldn't make money at the university.
Interesting. The other thing, again, all I know about Hume is he sat around playing billiards.
He was a fun guy.
Right. He was like, right?
Super fun guy. They called him a Bon David, like a happy or good David. Like he had a reputation.
I know that he would teach his classes like in a tavern and like playing pool, and to show cause and effect and stuff, he would like play pool. I mean, that's what again, all I know are these stupid anecdotal things like this about these guys.
But that's a good anecdote. That's a very good anecdote, because he said, like, you can't, if you're playing pool and you hit the cue ball into the 8-ball and it goes into the pocket, he says, you see one object hitting another, but you don't see causation. It's like you don't actually see causality. You just see one perception followed by another perception. There's a sound, and he's like, where's the cause and effect? And he says, like, that's actually missing from your perception. And then comes Kant. Immanuel Kant comes to solve the problem.
I was going to say, this is the next guy. Immanuel Kant is a German guy. This is a little bit later. Okay, he's the next big guy.
Very uptight German guy.
Very uptight. I'll ask about the one thing I know about him, but go ahead. Yeah, Prussian. I think he was from Prussia.
Yes,
right?
You're right.
Which was sort of like
Königsberg, I guess.
The most German of German, sort of like, it was the kind of very powerful little country in sort of Central Europe that was weirdly powerful for a while, and had this kind of philosopher, Emperor Frederick the Great, right? Who sort of was like,
yes, that's right.
Who was this sort of guy who wanted to become this kind of ideal king, and that he was sort of a great warrior, but he was a great thinker and stuff like that. I don't know why. Why am I going off about a little history of Prussia? I don't know why.
That context is helpful, man.
Okay, and so you get Immanuel Kant.
Kant, yes.
Yes.
Kant is stuck between the two different branches we just talked about, the rationalists who believe in reason is everything, and the empiricists who think you study it through your senses. And he's very famous because he figures out a way to marry those two together. And so he says that the mind, your mind, my mind, everybody's mind, has certain kind of categories or structures. And so when reality hits it, our mind sculpts it in a way so that what we would call experience is a weird combination of what's really out there and what our mind does to that material. So we can't help but see the world in terms of time and space and causation, because that's how our mind organizes reality. But we can't get outside of our mind to see what reality is in itself. He calls that the thing in itself. Says you're forever prevented from seeing what that is.
We're always trapped from really seeing what's around us. Jesus Christ.
More paranoia.
Yes. More just terrifying paranoia. I mean, it's just like, Jesus Christ. That's amazing. So you can never truly see something. This is interesting. Again, all I know about him, is he was bananas. He was like super sort of OCD sounding.
Yeah, very like sort of.
Yeah, and he had some servant who basically had to control his whole life, and he had to eat at a certain time. Everything had to happen by an incredibly rigorous timetable. And then when he went to sleep, he had to literally be like tied up and sort of like mummified when he would go to sleep for some reason.
I did not know that. Is that true? Is that true?
Well, like wrapped up in this crazy ass way, like almost like swaddled like a child in order to be able to sleep. Otherwise he couldn't sleep. And then this guy had to release him in the morning. I mean, the whole thing just sounds bonkers. Now, again, I could be completely misremembering this, but it sounds good. And it's an interesting little...
It does sound good. I cannot confirm nor deny the story.
Exactly. I'm not the philosopher. I can say this shit if I want to. But he's very important because, as you say, he marries these two traditions. And then it seems like that kind of releases a lot of craziness, and you start to get into the Romantic era, right?
Yeah.
And you're moving away almost from rationalism, and you start to get into this really kind of funky new era of philosophy. And who do we have then?
It's a fun time.
Yeah, and you start to have like who? You start to have like
well, Hegel and Spinoza or Schopenhauer.
Hegel is famously impossible to understand. Not that any of these other guys are such a piece of cake, but Hegel is
all is water.
again.
Let's go with Thales.
Those are my men. Those are my guys.
The pre-Socratics. That's
I'm loving Parmenides is like never changes, nothing. I'm like, this is my guy right here. But you get Hegel, who's famously impossible to understand.
Yeah.
So what can you tell me about, what's his name? Georg Wilhelm Hegel, or?
Yes.
Okay.
He's got like 10 names before Hegel, and he follows after Kant.
What are we talking now? We're talking like early 19th century?
We're talking like the early 1800s,
Okay.
Early 19th century. He's writing stuff like, I don't know when the Phenomenology of Spirit comes out. It's like
Jesus.
the first, decade of the 1800s, like 1806 or something like that.
Okay.
I think like as he's writing this, Napoleon is like, is taking territory and stuff. Yeah.
And a lot of these kind of romantic thinkers are very fascinated by Napoleon. Right? They see him as this sort of like epic figure that's personifying a lot of kind of philosophical ideals and stuff, right? In some ways?
Yes. At least at first.
Yes, right.
I think that's right.
Before it's revealed that he's a complete fucking loony tyrant. But yes, okay.
But yeah, there's Hegel and all the people of the 19th century are very excited about the evolution, not in Darwin's sense, but maybe the development of world history. So Hegel's like, yeah, these philosophers are right, but the real issue is that the mind is like this great driving force in all of human history and all of nature. So Hegel says, he doesn't say the word God, he says mind or spirit is like working itself out all through human history. And as things happen, like this war and that famine and this constitution, what's happening is the mind is slowly progressing towards perfection. And we're along for the ride. So actually, Hegel is not a pessimist. He thinks we're all going somewhere beautiful and it's going to be glorious.
Fascinating.
And that all of nature is purposive and moving towards a good sort of state of completion, a sort of divine state.
And he sees who's driving this. Is it the great figures of history? Is it sort of people like Napoleon, or like the sort of is he have a kind of great man of history thing, or am I wrong about that with Hegel?
He thinks like, there's definitely people like Thomas Carlyle who think it's just the people. Hegel, I think, has a mixed view. Like certainly people can be drivers of it, but also he thinks it's bigger than any individual, and it's bigger than even humans, because humans are tapping into like a collective consciousness, and all of this is working its way out so that eventually, and this is what a lot of people don't like about him is that people interpret this to mean that the state will eventually also be perfect.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the thing about him that I kind of associate with him is there's a kind of proto-fascist thing a little bit.
People do. I think that's a little unfair, but I get it.
All right, we don't. Whoa,
I think you need to get off Hegel right now.
Back it up, actor, and stop like throwing brickbats at Hegel. Okay, no, but I definitely feel like there's a sense of him being kind of this grandiosity and stuff like that.
Right wing,
and a lot of people. Even at the time, didn't a lot of people roll their eyes about him a little bit? Wasn't there a little bit like, whoa, steady, easy?
Yeah. He was very popular. He was well-liked. All his lectures were like standing room only, and his books were very popular. But I think the people coming next, like Schopenhauer, these guys, the people who were into the emotions more, they were like, they didn't trust this kind of reason will work it all out kind of thing.
Let's talk about Arthur Schopenhauer, the next step, who's a guy I like. This is where.
Now why do you like Schopenhauer?
Well, because he's basically a pessimist, isn't he? I mean, essentially he's pessimistic. I mean, essentially, I remember somebody once saying to me, basically Schopenhauer's point of view was life is not worth the cost of living. Basically,
that's pretty accurate.
Yes, that he was just very, very, and also he as a character seemed like a very colorful, bizarre, intense, tricky personality.
Crazy hair. There's great pictures of him. There's photos of him.
To me, he looks like a philosopher.
Yeah,
like he's got the crazy white hair, and he looks pissed off, and he's like, and apparently he was pissed off all the time.
He was.
And that people didn't recognize him as the genius that he actually was and stuff like that. But talk about him, because I think he's really, and he talks about will and all this stuff that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, people will recognize some of these ideas if they're into art, because at the same time, art is doing this in their music and in theater and in paintings. What Schopenhauer said was, you're not deep down rationality. That's not what makes human being tick. It's the will. He calls it the will to live or the will to life. And so you have this force in you that's just desire. You want to see what people really are. Look at lust and the desire to like copulate.
Yeah.
He's like, look at sex. That's what all creatures are made of, is willpower.
Yeah.
And he thought it was super disturbing and he thought it was horrifying. But there are some solutions to it.
Mm-hmm. What are the solutions?
Okay, the solutions are
Doctor.
what you do and what I do. Because one of the solutions, he says, is art and like theater.
So you're sort of channeling this kind of irrational vitality into creativity.
Yes. He says that the way to get away from this rapacious will is to have a kind of detachment, become aesthetic. Like, and you go to the arts. Because the arts are not about...
That kind of organizes this crazy, chaotic forces that are driving people. See, I think this is one of the things I did like about him was this sense that there's this kind of energetic force driving everything, which just makes sense to me.
Totally.
Somehow. It's like, it's not God, it's just this kind of driving, chaotic force in the world. That's sort of, and people are kind of chaotic. And isn't he a little bit of a precursor to sort of Freudian stuff too? That there's
totally.
This unconscious, that what you have is this level of like craziness in you.
Yeah.
And you have to somehow control it all the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, Freud says at one point, he's like, all I'm doing is making a scientific version of Schopenhauer.
Okay.
He even says this in one of his books.
I think he's really,
so
I think
you
he's
call it the id or
right.
desire or
I think
craving.
he's super interesting. Yeah. Let's just keep moving on. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. So you start to get the guys now who are the kind of like, and I guess Schopenhauer's a kind of proto-existentialist in some ways.
In a way, more so Kierkegaard, I think, who's just a little bit later.
Okay, so that's the next guy. Okay, so that's the next guy, I thought, who's Danish, right? And he's a Dane. And he's an interesting, weird little guy, right? He's like sort of a journalist, and has these kind of crazy love affairs that don't pan out, and he's a kind of funny figure, right? He's a sort of really...
Yeah, he did. He was in love with this girl, and it was going great, and then he realized, well, if I get married with her, they were engaged. He's like, if I get married, then I will slowly lose this love that we have. And so he broke off the engagement.
Right, famously.
And, and he's sort of a philosopher of like, sometimes people will say the philosophy of either or. If you make a choice or a decision to get married, then that rules out being a bachelor. And if you make a decision, it's sort of obvious, right? But if you make a decision to be a bachelor, you rule out.
And he wrote giant books about this.
But he says,
Steve, all he needed was you.
But he says, you're going to regret it either way. He's like, you get married, you're going to regret it. You don't get married, you're going to regret it.
Yes.
All you can do is just, he says, forget about reason. He says you have to take these leaps of faith, like in religion.
Right.
So even when it doesn't make sense, you have to commit to it.
Yes.
And that's why he's sort of a proto-existentialist, because the existentialists said same thing. They're like, you are what you choose to do and your actions. And that's the totality of who you are.
And there's a certain embracing the irrational too, right?
Yes.
I mean, embracing something that makes no sense. You just got to take that leap of faith. You have to take that step.
Exactly.
You have fear and trembling about taking that step, right? Because that's like a famous book of his, Fear and Trembling.
Exactly.
Which is all about, is that the one that's all about Abraham's going to sacrifice Isaac? The whole sort of organizing story of that is he talks about Abraham's going to sacrifice Isaac. And it's this choice of like, all right, you're telling me I had to demonstrate my faith. I'm willing to kill my own son in order to do that, right? I mean, I'm really not, I'm saying it very simplistically.
No, that's
like,
it. That's really the key idea.
Yeah,
and then what happens is right as he's about to kill his son, an angel reveals like a goat or a sheep or something in a bush and says, do this instead.
There's a burning bush. There's a burning bush. And then that's all right. Yes, there's a voice that comes out of the burning bush, and then there's actually a ram to sacrifice or something like that.
But he was willing to do it, which is what Kierkegaard is all excited about. He's like, you have to do the irrational. That's what faith is.
The other thing that seems cool to me about him, because going along with this sort of the sort of uncertainty of everything with him is that he wrote under a lot of pseudonyms. And he sort of, right? And he was so oftentimes, and he sort of wrote in such a way that you couldn't tell what position he really was taking.
He was playful.
He was very playful, so that you constantly didn't know quite where you stood with him. So it was almost like he was creating this sense of like, you're going to have to get a little bit lost in what I'm talking about and try to make sense of it purposefully in some ways. Yeah. Right? Yeah. It's really cool. It's really cool.
That shows you like that created that literary model of philosophy that has lasted for 100 years. Like Nietzsche does his philosophy that way.
Who's the next guy we should talk about?
Camus. Yeah. Camus, Sartre.
Okay. Nietzsche's the next guy. Friedrich Nietzsche is the next guy to talk about. So carry on from that. He's sort of...
Okay, so now Schopenhauer was the guy who was saying there's will to life, and Nietzsche comes along and says, yeah, it's even worse than Schopenhauer thought. Like, the will to power is in everything. And he says, you have a job in life, which is you can either be a kind of what he calls the last man, which is a kind of lazy, follow the crowd sheep, or you can be the Übermensch, which is the Superman or the Overman, which is somebody who understands that they have to make the meaning of their life and they own it, and they then go forward in life as the foundation of all meaning and purpose. And everybody else tends to just follow the herd. And so he says there's herd mentality, and then there's like this authentic, and the existential hero has to follow this authentic, and there's no roadmap for this.
Right.
You can look it up in the Bible. It's not going to tell you how to live your life. So there's a rejection of traditional God and religion.
Right. And so that all this kind of slave morality, which is what he talks about, right? And so God is dead. God has never existed. It's always been this construct of this kind of herd mentality has created this sort of confining morality that we've all been trapped by for millennia, right? I mean, that it's like since Christ, I suppose, because he was really into the Greeks, wasn't he?
Yeah, he loved the Greeks.
And he liked the irrational sort of like what seemed more irrational about the Greeks.
Yeah, the Dionysian stuff.
Right. And so he's sort of into that. He's super interesting. And his stuff is more poetic. I always found it easier to read than a lot of the other stuff because it's more poetic. It's more sort of accessible.
It is.
It's more. But the interesting thing is that it seems like a lot of the time when he talks about the Übermensch, the overman, the sort of thing we could become if we sort of free ourselves of all this stuff, he often talks about that as the sick man. In a way, it's the person suffering from illness and sickness. He was a very sickly person, right? And so it's almost like the person who recognizes he's sick, that is the person who recognizes he's diseased in some way with this morality is the person who can overcome it. Is that right?
Yes, that's it. Because you have to have these, like you have to have a step to get to the higher vitality. You have to go through this dark night of the soul, which is nihilism. So you have to like, it's sad that God doesn't exist,
right.
He says. You're sick. You're made, it's angst, it's anguish.
Right.
And you feel terrible because you feel abandoned by meaning. So you're miserable and depressed, and some people never get out of that. They just stay nihilists.
Right.
But he says, if you can get through that, then you realize it's all on your shoulders.
Right.
You have to bear the burden of responsibility.
And that's the interesting thing about it, because I think a lot of people get stuck in the stage of it that says, I'm free of responsibility. I can do whatever the fuck I want. I can kill you. I can I can do whatever the fuck I want, which is the challenge actually is kind of radical responsibility. Is that really the step you need to take is like, okay, that's what's going on. Now you're extra responsible for what you do, right?
Yes.
And Sartre says that sort of too, right? Later, Sartre kind of says that too. Jean-Paul Sartre later.
Totally. Yeah, he says the same thing.
In fact, you have more responsibility now because it's like all that shit's off. You're going to create your own morality. You have the responsibility to still exist in the world, right? And
that's exactly right. Yeah, people get confused and they think you're just going to be this kind of force. You just rape, pillage, and burn.
Yeah, you can do whatever you want.
Sort of Dostoevsky,
right.
But in reality, you have to overcome that alienation. And now all of a sudden it's the most humanistic, Jean-Paul Sartre says, because you now have to protect everybody. You have to create ethics and rules that help everybody instead of hurt people.
Right.
You have to...
Which is, I think, a thing people misunderstand about Nietzsche a lot, it seems like to me.
They do.
Because I think people stop at the point of going, well, he says God's dead. He's just all for like everybody killing each other.
Yeah, that's not Nietzsche.
Yeah, I didn't think so. I didn't think so, Steve. I just wanted to clarify, which is why we're doing...
You nailed it.
Which is why I'm asking the philosopher.
There's that movie that got a lot of attention, like Everything All at Once, Everything Everywhere All at Once. Yeah. And it sort of has some of these issues in it. Like there's sort of the daughter and there's like the everything bagel, which represents nihilism, and she's stuck there. And she has to, her mom and she have to work to this higher level where they have to create meaning and purpose. And instead of trying to find it somewhere else. And so the film is sort of playing with these ideas too.
We're at the 20th century. We can just blow through a lot of this because it ain't that interesting.
Let's just jump to the end.
Let's just jump to the end. We could just go. I mean, you got...
and it culminates in the Chinwag.
Should we just say fuck it? I mean, it's up to you. There's a couple more. I mean...
we won't name drop, but I'll just say like kind of what happens in the 20th century.
Just go through go through.
So just to cap it off, or to put a cherry on it, as they say.
Thanks.
You get the scientific philosophers of the 20th century who are like really into logic, and they do great work by creating...
Because science is developing to such a stage now that it's looked upon as like a useful tool for philosophy.
Yeah, and philosophers are doing logic that then becomes useful to computer science. Like philosophers created the logic that made the binary calculus for making computers. So that stuff that Alan Turing built, that was all like built on the shoulders of people like Bertrand Russell and Carnap. And anyway, so there's all those science guys.
And they're boring.
They tend to dominate. And they're a little boring. I think they're awesome, but they're a little boring. They're a little dry. And then they're sort of in England and in the States. And then on the continent, the French, the German, the Spanish philosophers, they're doing much more literary type stuff. They're writing like novels, and then it gets really weird starting in the 60s and 70s where you get the rise of postmodernism and people like Foucault, and I just said we weren't going to name drop, but Deleuze, Foucault, and Derrida.
And these guys are all sort of, and there's a lot of like artistic stuff with that. They're looking at literature too, as well as like history and stuff. And again, they're also saying there's no underpinnings to any of this stuff.
Yeah.
Right. There's no...
They're like, look at the language, and they're like, language you think is making sense, but if you look closely, it's not tied to anything.
Right.
It's just referring back to itself all the time.
Right.
And that's what they're focusing on.
So everything's sort of, all bets are off about like meaning and stuff like that.
And they're also very influenced by Marx. Like they see everything as a power struggle. It's a class struggle. It's a race struggle. It's always a struggle.
Well, that's an interesting thing. It's the last guy, because it's true. Marx becomes so important in the later 20th century. And he's a guy where everything is based in sort of, history is this sort of class struggle building towards a kind of utopia at some point.
Yeah. Marx was hugely influenced by Hegel, who he said, I turned Hegel on his head. Because Hegel was like about the idea, like, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, that's all happening in your head. And Marx was like, no, it's all about economics. It's about the material world. Do you have wealth? The classes are in tension with each other. Then a revolution has to happen, and that produces progress. So that's still very influential in continental philosophy, I would say.
And even now, pretty influential still.
It still is, yeah.
So the guy I want to ask about that is still outstanding, that I wanted to ask the philosopher about, is Martin Heidegger.
Oh, Heidegger.
And I remember taking a class in existentialism in college, and just being, most of them, I was like, okay, I get this. But Heidegger, I was like, I don't entirely understand what the fuck we're talking about anymore. And he seemed interesting. I mean, give me a little bit about Heidegger, Martin Heidegger. And I have some questions about it, though, because it's interesting.
Okay. He's a really interesting character because we have to separate sort of his philosophy from his politics. He ended up being a Nazi.
He did. He was a Nazi. He was a member of the Nazi Party. Nice
Much
one.
to the disappointment.
Nice one, Professor.
Yeah, way to go, Martin.
Good. The smart choice. The wise choice. Okay.
Yeah. In fact, it's even worse because his teacher was Husserl, and who was Jewish, and good old Marty actually like went along with banning him, I think, from the library or from his offices or some shit. I mean, he turned into a prick.
And why? Just expedience, fear? Like,
yeah. I mean, as far as we can tell, his career was advanced by, being a member.
Yeah.
And so it was political for him. And so that's to his everlasting shame. But he did most of his good philosophy before that happened. And so like Being in Time is from 1927, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's also not a good writer.
Okay.
So
really?
He was not, he's just impenetrable. He's like Hegel. But I do think his ideas were really cool. And it's something that artists gravitate to, because he said, look, if you look at Plato and Aristotle and all these other philosophers, they were all about their head. They were like, you want to make a map of the world in your head, and that represents the world. And so you have these representations of the world. That's what knowledge is. Mm-hmm. And Heidegger said, actually, that's just one kind of knowledge. There's another kind of knowledge that's much more in the body. Mm-hmm. Like you're sort of interacting with the world and not examining it. You're just using your body like a tool in a way. Mm-hmm. Like, here's an example. Like, you don't notice your glasses. Mm-hmm. Until they break. Then all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, now my glasses are a thing in the world. And before that, they were just an extension of my body. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of like jazz musicians and actors, they like this idea because there's a way in which you are using your body as a way of investigating things. And you're not up in your head when you're improvising jazz,
So it's instinct and stuff like that? It's that kind of thing?
It's instinct, but it can be cultivated too. Like he says, there's two ways to operate in the world. Like one is the world is like present to hand, which means you can do science on it. Like you can look at the glasses and it's present. Uh-huh. And the other is that the world is ready to hand, which means you're just always, it's like an extension of you. You're constantly like using all these tools. Like, you could be driving your car or playing the drums and you're not even...
The unconscious, acting of just every day, of just your life, the kind of unconscious...
Yes.
And does he think one is better than the other? Or does he...
He thinks one hasn't got enough attention by philosophy
which is the
embodied. Uh-huh. Yeah. And then he has other ideas too, but to me, that's the really interesting stuff.
Interesting. The one thing I associate with Heidegger, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, is, to my mind, there's this idea of authenticity with him.
Yes.
Because there's lots of talk about authenticity for a long time now. Sort of general, this idea of being authentic in the world. Yeah. And people being authentic. And people presenting authentically. And it's such a thing in the world now. And I always remember when my son was a kid, we were watching this gamer kid on YouTube. And I was like, and the kid was going through a whole crisis at home. So he was sitting there talking, and I remember my son saying, what's great about this guy is that it's so real. He's so authentic. Uh-huh. And I thought, is he though? He's filming this and sort of, but so the idea of authenticity, but I don't know if that's what Heidegger was talking about.
Yes.
I don't even know what I'm talking about when I talk about that, because I actually think that's part of the problem is, what the fuck does it even mean, authenticity?
No, that's great, because that's the other thing he's really famous for. And what I was talking about is what's called we'll use a couple of words here. One is phenomenology, which is like, what does it feel like to be in the world? Uh-huh. And the other is the Heidegger, the existentialist. Uh-huh. And the existentialist is what you're talking about, which is there's a way to be in the world, which he calls like inauthentic. He actually has a word for this that translates in English to the they self. Mm-hmm. You're like the herd, like Nietzsche said. Mm-hmm. You're anonymous. You're just blending in with the crowd on your couch watching the same Netflix series everybody else is watching.
Jesus Christ.
I'm sorry, man. That was a little too...
That was a little too close to home. That cut a little close to the bone, Steve. Okay.
Sorry.
No, you were really looking at me when you said that.
Did I say that out loud? And then the other way is to be authentic, which is you realize that you're going to die. Everyone's going to die. Your life only has a finite duration. You better get on it right now, and that will put you into a mode of action and responsibility that gives you a kind of authenticity, and that's what you're going for.
You will live authentically if you sort of acknowledge death in some ways. Is that what it is? So it's like, oh, that's interesting.
Death is important.
That kind of forces you to, it will automatically sort of compel you to act authentically.
Yeah.
And so in some ways, the authentic thing is this kind of, because again, that feels like that could just mean like, well, then just go out and fucking kill people if you want to. Go out and rob banks and like go out and do whatever you want because you're going to die, so you might as well. But that's not what he's saying, ultimately.
Well, it's a good point. He says that's when you're in this sort of despair mode, but you have to move past the angst to this authentic mode. But saying that is one thing. It's true that what you're describing is a real problem for existentialists. Like I think when Paul Schrader wrote like Taxi Driver, and they made that movie Taxi Driver, he said he was trying to make an American existential film. And it's true that like that guy doesn't quite, Bickle, I guess, is the character that De Niro's playing.
Yeah, Travis Bickle, yeah.
He doesn't really know why he's doing things. He's just sort of like, at one moment he's like going to shoot a politician, and then the next one he's saving a kid, like, and so people have worried about, you could have a really authentic serial killer. Yeah. Where they know that there's no God and the cops aren't going to catch you, or maybe they are going to catch you. Fuck it, who cares? I'm now going to murder people in the most authentic, responsible way that I can. That's a twisted problem for existentialism.
I guess so. I mean, right, because you've eliminated any sense of like these moral guideposts.
Yeah, you're not going to get caught.
Right. And so really, why wouldn't it be? Why wouldn't if you've moved through the despair and now you're happily killing people, then I guess that really is a problem. That's
like the American Psycho scenario too. That film, it's a weird, gleeful psycho killer who's cutting people up and running around. And
how can we say it's wrong, really?
Yeah.
How can we really?
The philosophers know that this is a problem and they try to address it. So people like Sartre and Heidegger will say, when you choose to do something, you're not just choosing for yourself, you're choosing for all mankind.
Right. But then that seems like that puts you right back at like morality and kind of herd morality.
It's a higher morality, they think, because you're owning it now. And the herd was just following rules.
And so I guess that's like that famous book, The Outsider, which is Albert Camus, where the guy has sort of reached this point of despair and he's on the beach and he sees this dude and he just kills him, right? Isn't that what he just decides?
That's a stranger,
Oh, the stranger, outsider, he just decides, he just kills him. He just decides to kill him. Does he come to a higher understanding beyond that? Is that what happens in that book? I don't remember. Like what happens?
The way I read that, no, I think people might argue with this, but the way I read that book is he's like in prison at the end and he doesn't even know why he did it. He doesn't know why he did it. He's this darker existential hero who is living through the absurd. Like life is absurd. Good people don't get rewarded. Bad people don't get punished. Shit happens randomly and then you die.
And because doesn't Camus say, if all this is the case, why don't you just kill yourself? But you don't. But you have to then make the move. So what is it that he says you don't need to do that? Is it that there is some worldly morality you can reach and you will be able to live a more authentic life that isn't sort of all about killing other people, but is about like...
Yeah, okay, one solution is you could find this higher morality, which would be a way to help everybody all at once. But that's really a way of reintroducing the old morality.
Religion. Yeah, it's religion again.
The other way, though, is that you become the great artist. So Nietzsche and the other existentialists say you now become the artist of meaning. You're creating like the painter is creating. And the other great metaphor that Camus says is imagine Sisyphus rolling this giant boulder up a hill for all eternity, and that's the punishment the gods have given him. And so you are Sisyphus, and you're rolling the ball up the hill. You try to get a degree, you try to find a partner, you try to get married, you have kids, you get retired, and you think it's all going somewhere, but it really isn't because nothing means anything in itself. And then Camus says when Sisyphus lets go of the rock, or when the rock rolls all the way down every night, and he has to start over, when he's looking at the rock bounding down the hill, he has to laugh. And that's the sort of creative, artistic response to the absurd,
which is you should love it anyway and say yes to it, even though it's absurd. So that's the other authentic solution.
Aha, interesting. So comedy is what it's all about. It all comes down to comedy.
It comes down to comedy.
Just comedy.
In a way, it's true. It really is.
That's interesting. It really kind of is. This absurd, to embrace the absurdity and just the kind of cosmic laugh.
Yeah, the cosmic humor.
Wow. Well, there you go. I just was curious about Heidegger and authenticity and all that stuff because it seems so basic.
But in your field, people say that there's authentic and inauthentic acting, right?
Well, it gets into a whole world of that. Now there's so much more an emphasis on acting and sort of just be yourself. Just be yourself, which of course I always sit there and go, what the fuck does that mean? That means nothing. I mean, if you're asking me that, if you're saying that, you've really set me a poser because what the hell does it mean? So it's like, but also in the terms of acting, it's very strange because I'm like, that's never what acting was supposed to mean up until this point.
And you're not like your characters at all. Like I know you. You're very different from your characters.
Well, no, you're not. You're not like your characters, but it brings this question up of, well, obviously I am. In some way I am because I'm creating this thing out of my own experience. I'm creating it out of my own imagination. I'm creating it out of all these components of myself that make me up, that are somehow created by my life experience. So if I'm playing some fucking serial killer or something like that, no, I'm not, but somehow it is me too. And I do think I've come to appreciate that idea more. I think I spent a lot of time as an actor going, I'm going to do everything I can to not be me, to become this other person. And it's like the realization that you're not really ever going to become this other person fully, that in some way it's always going to be, I don't know, it's a very, acting, if you start thinking about it this way, becomes a real labyrinth. It just becomes this real hall of mirrors. And you just start going, I don't know, I mean, sure.
Do you have to let elements of your real self peek through? Is that the idea? Just parts of yourself?
I suppose they do no matter what. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like they're going to anyway, and it's sort of like, I had an acting teacher who did a very interesting thing in our third year of acting class. And he did this thing where he just challenged us to do this thing, a very technical thing of creating 3 levels of a character. You were playing the character. So I'm playing, whatever. And he applied it to sort of more 20th century and modern drama. So I'm playing some character in a Beckett play or something like that. And he said, but then there's always a thing that character thinks they're doing. So there's a kind of uber character. This person is like, and so now pick a sort of larger idea of what this character's being. So in other words, like if this character thinks he's really awesome, now click out of that character and be Elvis for a bit.
Oh shit.
You know what I mean? Pick this sort of archetype of what's cool, if that's what the character's trying to do. And then at some point I want to see you go to the under thing, which is you. I just want to see you be you. It's a very weird exercise that the guy did, but there was something really interesting to me about it.
That is.
And there still is. It's one of the one things from drama school that I still sort of go like, that was really interesting and weird that there was.
Have you ever applied it to a role that you played?
I think it happens anyway. I think it happens a lot anyway. I mean, for instance, this movie I just did with this history teacher, there's an interesting way in which unconsciously, this movie, The Holdovers, it's like, there's a very interesting way in which I wasn't thinking this way, but that a guy like that is playing a character already. He's already, there's the guy, but he's putting on a big show of being the classical historian, and he's playing the idea of it. I didn't consciously think this until afterwards I see the movie in some ways, like, oh, right. He's got a shtick. We all have a shtick. And I guess that's in some ways that's the they self you're talking about with Heidegger. It's like, it's the shtick you have, right? The shtick you're doing that goes along, that gets you through the day with everybody else. I got my shtick. I got my one shtick I do. I play it every day so that everybody knows who I am when I arrive at work.
Living and dying by
but
this
it is.
shtick.
And it's like, I'm this guy. Don't worry about it. I'm this guy. And it's like, but maybe that's not really what's going on. And I was saying this to you before, actors get to break that up and get to go, there is no shtick, and the idea, and that's where as an actor, you are in pursuit of not having a shtick, you know what I mean? So it gets very frustrating. That's why typecasting is so difficult for me. It's like, but I don't want to just be this one thing. I want to be all these different things because I can be all these different things because we all can be all these different things. you know?
There's also something like, not to give anything away in that film, but there's something that happens in the story of that film and other films too, where the person can't cling to their shtick anymore. Like they have to suddenly make a very difficult decision.
You have to give up your shtick.
You see them, you see them very vulnerable.
Yeah.
And that's a really important moment.
You have to drop your shtick. Yeah. And it's always an interesting thing. When somebody meets a point at which their shtick no longer functions in the right way. And that's terrifying. I mean, it is.
Shtick no longer.
Well, but I mean, it's all the stuff we were talking about. I mean, you know, it doesn't work anymore, you know, and you've got nothing. Now you have to be you, whatever the fuck that means.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Suddenly you're thrown back on you, and who knows what that is. Oh, Martin Heidegger.
Oh, Marty.
Oh, good old Marty Heidegger. For this and other exciting philosophical questions, stick with the chinwag, folks. Professor, I can't thank you enough for that rollicking trip.
It was rollicking.
It was amazing.
High speed.
Listen, dude, I mean, it's amazing. It's like, you know, it's awesome. And you put this stuff across clearly, you know what I mean? It's like,
thank you.
I was understanding some stuff I've never understood. I don't get that shit. I couldn't make head nor tail of it.
That is too kind.
No, it's true.
But the chinwag, you can't get this stuff on any other podcast. You're not going to get this on the NPR podcast.
It's true. And if you have any further questions for the philosopher, questions about God and the soul, things like that, freedom, anything like that, you can just pop them over. Just send them to us anywhere.
Put them in Instagram.
Yep.
You can put them in YouTube.
Yep.
You can send them to
anywhere.
We're all over the place. TikTok, Facebook.
Yes, any of these platforms, we're available. You can ask questions because I just have more questions. All I have are questions now, Steve. Now, honestly, Ask the Philosopher, that was, listen, a lot better than Ask the Actor. Yeah, the actor's got nothing to say. The actor's got nothing to say.
No, not true. There's a lot of similarities, actually, between, because I teach at an art school, a lot of the actors and the comedians are really drawn to philosophy.
Yeah, I think
because
that
there's
makes
something
sense.
about it. Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Well, maybe we can do Ask the Actor sometime. That'll really be gripping.
Let's do that.
Okay, we'll do Ask the Actor sometime. Anyway, this was outstanding. Thank you, Professor.
That was fun.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. And wag on.
Wag on.
Chinwag is a production of Treefort Media and Touchy Feely Films. Hosted and executive produced by Paul Giamatti and Stephen Asma. Executive producers for Treefort are Kelly Garner and Lisa Ammerman. Dan Carey is executive producer for Touchy Feely. Our series producer is Rachel Whitley Bernstein. Original theme music by Luke Topp, with additional music by Via Mardot. Oscar Guido is our executive in charge of production. Tom Monahan is head of audio for Treefort. Audio production supervision by Jared Brom and Matt Dyson. Editing and mixing by Jeff Neal. Animation created by Alex Sokol. Research assistance by Aidan Brooks. Lastly, for more information, go to chinwagpod.fm and find us on Instagram or TikTok at chinwagpod or on Twitter at chinwag_pod.